The rain had ended just before dawn, leaving the roads glistening like ribbons of glass as the parish bells of Dorset began to toll for the wedding at Ravenswood Hall. Julia Harcourt rode side-saddle upon a borrowed mare, her gloves worn thin, her hem damp with mud. She was late, unforgivably late, but she had been tending to her mother's coughing fit and the tears that followed. It was not in Julia's nature to think of appearances when someone she loved was suffering. Yet in the ordered world of the gentry, compassion was no currency. Punctuality, poise, and pedigree were all that mattered. By the time she reached the great iron gates of Ravenswood, the drive was already crowded with carriages lacquered like beetle shells, crests shining on the doors. The hall itself shimmered under the pale spring light, its windows gleaming like 100 watchful eyes. Julia, breathless and trembling, handed her cloak to a servant and tried to quiet her heart. Inside, music floated through corridors heavy with perfume and chatter, the air thick with candle smoke and gossip. She could already feel it, the hum of judgment reserved for those born too far below the chandeliers. She slipped through the marble gallery, seeking the antechamber where the bride's guests gathered. But in her haste she nearly collided with a tall figure emerging from the shadows. His coat was of black superfine wool, his cravat tied with effortless precision, his bearing so composed it seemed carved rather than living. The faint scent of tobacco and winter roses clung to him. She looked up, startled, and found herself caught by the calm gray of his eyes that regarded her with a mixture of surprise and quiet curiosity. "Forgive me, sir," she stammered. "I did not see." Before she could finish, a voice from somewhere behind her, a young officer perhaps, emboldened by champagne, murmured something coarse, a jest about country girls losing their way among gentlemen. The words struck like a slap of their own. Heat rushed to her cheeks. And because the stranger before her stood nearest, because he seemed the embodiment of that mocking world, Julia's shame turned to reckless defense. She lifted her hand and struck him, hard, clean across the face. The sound cracked through the gallery. Conversation stopped. A servant gasped. A fan clattered to the floor. The man did not move. His jaw tightened, but his expression remained unreadable, calm as stone under her trembling fury. Only the faintest bloom of color marked his cheek where her glove had met it. "I thought you," she tried, breath catching. But the murmurs had already begun, rippling outward like wind through reeds. "Who is she?" "The vicar's girl. He'll have her ruined by morning." Then, with terrifying courtesy, the man inclined his head. "And what honor, Miss Harcourt?" he asked softly. "Do you defend so fiercely?" Her name on his lips froze her blood. She hadn't given it. Somehow he knew. Julia backed away, mortified, as the crowd parted. A lady in sapphire silk whispered, "He spoke to her?" A gentleman chuckled under his breath. Then a voice rang out near the stairwell. "His Grace, the Duke of Ravenswood, has taken no offense." The Duke of Ravenswood. The name struck her like thunder. The landlord whose rent they could barely afford, whose patronage kept her father's parish alive. The man whose shadow fell across half of Dorset. Julia's knees weakened. She dropped into a curtsy so deep she nearly lost her balance. "Your Grace, I beg." He raised a hand, silencing her. "There is nothing to beg," he said simply, though his tone carried something inscrutable beneath its calm. "Perhaps the error is mine for standing in the wrong place." He turned and walked away through the ring of astonished guests, leaving her standing alone in the hush he had created. That evening, humiliation swirled through every corner of the village. By the time Julia returned home, the servants had already heard. By supper, even the curate's wife was whispering that Miss Harcourt had assaulted nobility. Her father paced the parlor in despair, muttering about apologies and debts. Her mother, pale and trembling, held Julia's hands and wept. "You've shamed us, my love," she whispered, "before the very man who could take our home with a stroke of his pen." Julia lay awake long after the candles burned low, replaying the moment over and over, the sharp sting of her glove, the impossible stillness of his gaze, that quiet question, "What honor do you defend so fiercely?" She had no answer, only the hollow ache of regret and a strange, inexplicable sense that something had begun in that instant, though she could not yet name it. 2 days later, a carriage stopped at the vicarage. A liveried footman delivered an envelope sealed with black wax. Her father's hands shook as he broke it open. Inside lay a single line, written in a firm, measured hand. "Repairs to the Harcourt roof will commence Monday. Payment has been arranged. R." Julia's father looked bewildered. Why would the Duke after? He turned to his daughter, but she had no words. Over the following weeks, quiet gestures continued. A new Bible arrived for the parish, its pages edged in gold leaf. A basket of rare tea was left at their door with no card. The same people who had mocked her now speculated endlessly. Some called it charity, others whispered of scandal. Julia bore it all in silence, her pride bruised yet strangely restless. One Sunday as she left the small stone church after service, she saw him again. The Duke stood near the gate, his black horse held by a groom, his silver hair catching the sun. He greeted her father first, with impeccable formality before turning to her. "Miss Harcourt," he said quietly, "I trust your family fares better." "Yes, your grace." Her voice wavered. "We are undeserving of such kindness." He studied her a moment, then spoke so softly the wind nearly stole the words. "Kindness, Miss Harcourt, is rarely undeserved. But I wonder if you think so little of yourself as to believe it could never be meant for you." She could not answer. He bowed slightly and mounted his horse, the movement fluid and dignified. As he rode away, she realized her heart was beating in a rhythm she did not recognize, part dread, part awe. That night, she stood by her window, watching the distant glow of Ravenswood Hall across the valley. Somewhere within that vast house lived the man she had struck, the man who could undo her world with a word, and yet had not. Her shame warred with something quieter, deeper, curiosity, perhaps even longing. Downstairs, her father slept uneasily, unaware that the Duke's messenger had already returned with another letter, one Julia had not dared to open. It lay upon her writing desk now, sealed in black wax, waiting for courage. And as the first chill of midnight crept through the panes, she whispered to herself, half in fear, half in wonder, what manner of man forgives a woman who shamed him before his world? The candle sputtered. The seal gleamed faintly in the dark. Somewhere beyond the hills, Ravenswood's windows burned like watchful stars. The days lengthened and softened into the pale gold of late spring, yet gossip in Dorset refused to fade as quickly as the frost. What began as whispers at the Ravenswood wedding had ripened into a small scandal, retold in every drawing room, embroidered with fresh invention each time. Some claimed Julia Harcourt had been dismissed from her father's parish duties, others that she had been banished from county events altogether. The truth was simpler but lonelier. She had chosen to vanish from society herself. She spent her mornings tending to the parish children, her afternoons assisting her father with his sermons. At night she sat by the fire, mending gloves and pretending not to hear the pity in her mother's sighs. The world had reduced her to a single gesture, a slap, and no act of kindness could rewrite it. And yet, in the silence of her exile, something strange began to unfold. Ravenswood's carriage was seen more often near the vicarage. A basket of fine fruit appeared on their doorstep. Her father found new hymnals bound in leather, stamped discreetly with the Duke's crest. Each gift was both grace and reminder, rekindling the humiliation she wished to bury. When the parish roof collapsed during a night of heavy rain, the Duke's steward appeared the next morning with a work crew, saying only, "His Grace instructed that this matter be remedied." No bill arrived. The villagers stared at her as though she had bewitched him. Julia endured it with dignity, but the air of obligation pressed upon her like a weight she could neither lift nor return. It was on one of those rare sunny afternoons, when she went to deliver a handwritten note of thanks to Ravenswood Hall, that fate drew her back into his orbit. The estate stood like a dream of another world, stone lions guarding the entrance, tall windows reflecting the clouds. A footman led her through the grand vestibule to a gallery where portraits of long-dead ancestors gazed down with solemn eyes. She felt small, absurdly so, her simple muslin gown whispering against marble floors meant for duchesses. When the door to the library opened, she expected a secretary or steward. Instead, it was him. He stood by the hearth, a volume in hand, its spine gilded and worn. The firelight carved his profile, silver hair brushed back from a high brow, the faintest lines of grief etched near his eyes. He looked up, and for a moment neither spoke. The memory of her hand striking him, the sound that had echoed through marble, hung invisibly between them. "Miss Harcourt," he said at last, closing the book, "you have come to demand an explanation?" She flushed. "No, your grace. I came to express my gratitude. The roof, the books, it was far beyond our deserving." "Deserving has little to do with mercy," he replied. "And gratitude is not necessary for kindness. It is at best a shared burden." She hesitated, confused by the gravity in his tone. "Still, I could not rest until I had." "Until you had appeased your conscience," he finished gently. "Forgive me, Miss Harcourt. I know the look of someone weighed down by honor." He moved closer, and though his words were polite, there was something else in them, something searching. "Do you think me so vain that I took offense at a lady's courage? In a world of flatterers and cowards I found it refreshing." Her breath caught. The fireplace hissed softly. She wished she could hate him for such composure, for being the only man in Dorset not to scorn her. But his eyes, gray, distant, storm-like, held none of the amusement she expected. They held a sorrow that felt ancient, unhealed. She curtsied awkwardly. "You are too generous, Your Grace. It would have been easier if you had simply despised me." "Indeed," he said, almost smiling. "Easier but dull." The footman entered then, bearing tea, breaking the charged silence. They spoke of parish matters, of her father's health, of nothing that mattered and everything that did. When she rose to leave, he bowed with the solemnity of a man who knew exactly the power of restraint. Outside, the breeze carried the scent of roses. Julia's heart felt heavy and light all at once. But the county was not so easily moved by grace. That evening, her visit became the latest tale to adorn the gossip circuit. Lady Pembroke, whose vanity had long thirsted for the Duke's attention, declared over supper that the vicar's daughter has ambitions, though none of refinement. The notion spread like perfume spilled across velvet, intoxicating, impossible to contain. Julia endured the stares, the sly remarks, until one night at a small assembly she found herself standing alone beside the refreshment table while two matrons whispered loudly enough to be heard. "Imagine thinking a duke would look twice at a girl of no fortune," one said. "He's 50, my dear. She's barely 20. It is indecent if not absurd." Julia turned away, cheeks burning, when the room stilled. The air shifted like the hush before thunder. The Duke had entered, announced not by herald but by presence. Conversations faltered as though gravity itself had changed direction. He moved through the crowd with composed authority, acknowledging each bow and curtsy with the faintest nod. And then, before the entire assembly, he approached her. "Miss Harcourt," he said, his voice even, unmistakably warm. "Would you grant me the honor of this dance?" The silence was exquisite. The orchestra hesitated, then began to play. She could barely breathe as he took her hand, gloved, trembling, small in his, and led her to the floor. They waltzed beneath chandeliers dripping light like molten gold. Her eyes lifted once, meeting his, and in that suspended instant she saw what no one else seemed to notice. He was not a man chasing scandal but one reclaiming something long lost. Every turn, every measured step, felt like a defiance of the world that watched. When the final note died, he bowed over her hand, his breath near her wrist. "They will talk, Miss Harcourt," he murmured. "They already do," she whispered. "Then let them." His lips curved faintly, the words sounding almost like a vow. The music resumed around them, laughter filling the void their silence had left. Yet as she stepped back, the crowd parted again, this time to reveal Lady Pembroke, pale with disbelief. Her fan snapped shut with a sound sharp as judgment. Julia's courage faltered, she felt the room closing in. But when she looked again, the Duke's gaze remained steady, unwavering. It was as though, in offering her that single dance, he had drawn an invisible line across the polished floor, between mercy and mockery, between solitude and scandal. Later, as she climbed into her family's modest carriage, she caught sight of him on the terrace, watching her depart. The night wind lifted his silver hair. The lamplight traced the loneliness in his face. He raised his hand in a gesture so small it might have been mistaken for courtesy, yet she felt it strike deeper than any declaration. And when she reached home, her gloves still warm from his touch, she opened the letter that had waited on her desk for days. The handwriting was the same as before, measured, deliberate, unmistakably his. "Miss Harcourt," it read. "There are some debts that cannot be repaid in coin, only in courage. Tomorrow, if the weather is fair, walk to the edge of the lake. There are things best spoken where the world cannot overhear." Her pulse fluttered. She folded the letter carefully, holding it against her heart as if it might vanish. Beyond the window, the night deepened, alive with promise, peril, and the sound of rain beginning once more against the glass. The morning broke clear and silver, the mist rising from Ravenswood Lake like breath from a sleeping creature. Julia had scarcely slept. The Duke's letter lay beneath her pillow, its ink imprinted upon her thoughts until every word had become a whisper she could not silence. She dressed quietly, her mother still asleep, and slipped from the vicarage with only the birds as witnesses. The grass clung damp to her shoes, and the air smelled of wet earth and lilac. At the lake's edge, the world seemed suspended in stillness. The surface mirrored the pale sky so perfectly that she could not tell where one ended and the other began. Then from the trees came the soft sound of hooves. She turned, and there he was, astride a dark stallion, his figure outlined by the morning light like a memory recalled too vividly to fade. He dismounted with a soldier's grace, though time had surely tempered the strength in his shoulders. "Miss Harcourt," he greeted, his voice low and steady. "You came." "I said I would," she replied, though her heart was not so composed as her words. He smiled faintly. "Most would have burned my letter. Or worse, answered it in company. I am not most, your grace." "No," he said, and something softened in his gaze. "You are not." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, only fragile. The wind stirred the reeds. A swan glided across the lake, trailing a ribbon of ripples. She clasped her hands together, unsure whether to curtsy or to flee. "I wish to speak plainly," he began. "It is not my habit to invite scandal, though Dorset society insists I have done so already. Yet there are matters that cannot be settled by silence." Her pulse quickened. "If this is about that day—" "It began that day," he interrupted gently. "But it did not end there. You mistook me for another, and I mistook you for something fragile. Both of us were wrong." Julia felt a heat rise in her throat. "You think me reckless, perhaps? Foolish?" "I think," he said, "that you possess a kind of courage this world is not built to reward." The words disarmed her more than any reprimand could have. She turned her face away, pretending to watch the water. "You should not speak so, your grace. People already misunderstand." "Let them misunderstand." His tone sharpened slightly. "My title is armor enough. Yours, however, is not. Which is why I must ask, does my regard trouble you?" The question hung like a bell's echo, reverberating long after the sound had died. She could not answer. He took a step closer, but stopped before propriety could accuse him. "I have lived half my life among those who measure worth by lineage," he continued softly. "It is a cold arithmetic. I had begun to think warmth a childish indulgence until—" he hesitated. "Until you—" Her breath caught. The Duke of Ravenswood, known for restraint, feared for his intellect, was speaking as though confession itself were a wound. "You must not say such things," she whispered. "Not to me." "Then to whom should I say them?" His voice was low, almost pleading. "To those who flatter me in drawing-rooms? To women who call me noble but do not see the man behind the crest?" Julia's heart trembled at the rawness of it. And yet fear, sharp and dutiful, crept into her chest. "If anyone were to see us—" "They won't." He looked toward the trees. "This lake has kept more secrets than London ever could." A shadow crossed the sun then, cooling the light. She shivered despite the mild air. "Why me, your grace?" she asked finally. "You could have any woman in England, beautiful, titled, clever." He gave a quiet laugh. "I have had beauty and cleverness. Neither brought peace. But you—" his gaze searched her face with reverence, not possession. "You made me feel again, Miss Harcourt. Do you truly think I could ignore that?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to flee, yet could not move. "You are too kind to mistake gratitude for affection. And you are too proud to admit you feel both." The lake rippled with the sudden gust between them. She looked up at him then, truly looked, and saw not the Duke, but a man who had lost too much of his life to decorum and loneliness. His face, lined by years, held a gentleness that frightened her more than any anger could. "Your grace, please," she said at last, her voice breaking. "Whatever this is, it cannot be. The world would tear us both apart." He inclined his head. "The world has tried to tear me apart before. I have no fear of it." "I have," she whispered. Something flickered behind his composure, a sadness, perhaps even regret. "Then I shall not force courage upon you. Only ask that when you think of me, you do not think of the man you struck, but of the one who wished only to thank you, for reminding him he was still human." The gentleness of his words undid her. "You speak as though we shall never meet again." "Perhaps we should not," he said quietly. "Yet I fear I will find no peace in your absence either." A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, though no storm had yet formed. He glanced toward it. "Go home, Miss Harcourt, before the rain begins. It seems the weather, too, disapproves." She curtsied, the motion slow, weighted with things unsaid. "Good day, your grace." "Good day, Miss Harcourt." As she turned to leave, her skirt brushed the reeds, scattering droplets like diamonds. Behind her, he remained by the water's edge, motionless. Halfway to the vicarage, the first drops fell, soft, hesitant. She stopped beneath an oak tree, her pulse still wild. The air smelled of iron and memory. And though she told herself to forget, her body betrayed her. Every breath, every tremor recalled the sound of his voice, the quiet ache in it when he said her name. By the time she reached home, the rain had thickened. Her mother rushed to meet her, exclaiming that a messenger had come during her absence. "From Ravenswood Hall," she said breathlessly. "He left this for your father, though it bears your name upon the seal." Julia's fingers shook as she broke the wax. Inside lay a single folded sheet, damp at the edges but the handwriting still clear. "Miss Harcourt," it read. "If ever duty compels you to despise me, know that I shall not hold it against you. I would rather be scorned for sincerity than admired for silence. R." She pressed the letter to her chest, her heart torn between gratitude and dread. Outside, lightning flared white across the valley, illuminating Ravenswood's distant spires. The thunder that followed seemed to shake the very air, a sound like the warning of fate itself. And in its echo, Julia understood with chilling clarity that neither rumor nor propriety would end this. What had begun with a slap had already deepened into something far more dangerous, the stirrings of love that no storm could wash away. Summer unfolded across Dorset with deceptive gentleness. The hedgerows burst into bloom and the air hummed with bees, but for Julia Harcourt, peace had grown impossible. Every sermon, every village errand, every polite smile from a neighbor carried the echo of his name. The Duke of Ravenswood, whose letters had stopped as suddenly as they'd begun, haunted her thoughts like a melody she could not forget. 3 months had passed since their meeting by the lake, and though she told herself she was relieved, her heart knew better. Silence was its own cruelty. Her father's health had waned with the heat, and the vicarage, once filled with laughter, had fallen quiet. Julia bore the household burdens with tireless grace, yet something within her had changed. Her reflection in the mirror seemed older, touched by knowledge she wished she'd never gained. Each night she prayed for her feelings to fade, and each dawn they returned, patient and relentless as the tide. One afternoon, while returning from the market, she heard her name whispered among a pair of women near the bakery window. Their tones were sharp, gleeful. "Seen leaving the hall again, mark my words. No decent girl visits a man alone unless she hopes for marriage or mercy." "She'll have neither," said the other. "Lady Pembroke saw the Duke's carriage turn toward London this morning. He's hosting a charity ball there, half the peerage attending. I dare say he's found more suitable company." The words stung more than they should have. She had no claim to jealousy, no right to hope. And yet that evening, as she sat by her father's bedside, her mind betrayed her with visions of gilded mirrors, candlelight, and the Duke bowing before some elegant stranger. She wondered whether he had forgotten the lake, the letter, the unspoken trembling between them. Days later an invitation arrived, stamped with Ravenswood's crest. It was addressed to her father, but within was a note written in the Duke's unmistakable hand. "The parish shall benefit from the proceeds of a midsummer ball held at Ravenswood Hall. It would honor me if Miss Harcourt were present to represent the family." Her father, too weak to attend, urged her to go. "You must," he said gently. "For the parish, if not for yourself." So she went, though her hands trembled as she pinned the single pearl her mother had once worn to her throat. Her gown was modest, cream muslin trimmed in pale blue ribbon, but when she saw herself in the candlelit mirror, she thought of the lake again. The stillness, the honesty, the way he had looked at her as if seeing not what she was but what she tried to hide. Ravenswood Hall glowed that night like a constellation fallen to earth. Carriages lined the drive, and inside, the ballroom was a cascade of light, crystal chandeliers, gold leaf moldings, and the faint scent of roses twined through every corner. She felt small among the elegants, though not unworthy. The Duke stood near the orchestra, speaking with a cluster of titled guests. His silver hair caught the light, but his expression, composed, distant, made her heart falter. He had not yet seen her. Lady Pembroke was among the guests, resplendent in crimson satin. The woman's eyes narrowed the instant she spotted Julia. "How bold of her," she murmured to a companion. "A vicar's daughter at a duke's ball. I should think the scandal itself would wilt her flowers." Julia ignored her, though the whispers clung to her like burrs. She made her way to the refreshment table, hoping to disappear into the crowd. But the crowd, it seemed, had other plans. A young man, an officer recently returned from Spain, approached her with gallant courtesy. "Miss Harcourt, I believe? Might I claim this dance before the room consumes you entirely?" She smiled politely and allowed herself to be led to the floor. Yet even as they moved through the steps, her eyes betrayed her, searching for him. The Duke was speaking to Lady Pembroke now, and though his manner remained impeccable, something about his stillness felt forced. When his gaze finally found hers across the room, the world seemed to hold its breath. Their eyes met only for a heartbeat, but it was enough. Moments later, as the music faded, Lady Pembroke approached Julia with a smile too sharp to be kind. "My dear, you must forgive me, but I cannot allow ignorance to persist. It seems His Grace has been most generous to your family." She extended a folded letter. Julia recognized the Duke's handwriting at once. "This was found among misplaced correspondence. I thought it only fair that you should see what he says when you're not present to hear it." Julia hesitated, then unfolded the page. The words within were brief, formal, and devastating. "Her gratitude is touching though misguided. I should have known better than to indulge sentiment. It invites trouble where there should be none." Laughter rippled around them. Her breath caught, vision blurring. She looked toward the Duke, who was already striding through the crowd, confusion flashing across his face as he realized what had happened. "Lady Pembroke," he said sharply, "that letter was private." "Indeed, Your Grace," she replied sweetly. But its content was hardly becoming of charity. Julia's throat closed. "So that is what I am to you," she said softly. "A lesson in misplaced kindness." He froze. "No. That letter was written weeks ago, before you decided to make a spectacle of me," she interrupted, her voice trembling but steady. "I thought your pity had ended, but it seems it only changed costume." Every head turned. The orchestra faltered. The air between them throbbed with humiliation and heartbreak. "Miss Harcourt," he said quietly, "if I have wronged you, it was through cowardice, not deceit." "Then you will forgive me for returning the favor," she whispered. Her hand trembled as she dropped the letter at his feet, curtsied once, and fled the room before the first whispers could begin again. Outside, the night was heavy with heat. She descended the marble steps and crossed the gardens where lanterns flickered among the rose bushes. The sound of the orchestra followed her faintly, like a distant heartbeat. She did not look back. Behind her, the Duke stood motionless in the doorway, the letter crumpled in his hand. Lady Pembroke watched from a window, her triumph as bright as her jewels. But the Duke's face, drawn, stricken, human, told another story. He turned away from the guests without a word, vanishing into the shadows beyond the ballroom. By the time Julia reached the edge of the estate, the first drops of rain began to fall. It was the same kind of rain that had first brought them together, soft, unrelenting, impossible to ignore. She paused beneath a willow tree, pressing her hand to her chest as though to steady something breaking within. In the distance, the music swelled again, masking the sound of footsteps approaching across the gravel. She turned sharply, breath catching, her heart caught between hope and dread. But the figure that emerged from the darkness was not the Duke. It was the steward, solemn, soaked, carrying another letter. "From His Grace," he said quietly. Julia hesitated before taking it. The seal was broken, the ink smeared by rain. Only one line remained legible. "If I cannot have your forgiveness, Miss Harcourt, then I shall have your absence. But know that it will ruin me all the same." The paper trembled in her hands as the wind tore it apart, scattering the pieces into the wet grass. She watched them vanish and whispered to the storm, "Then we are both ruined." The thunder answered her like a vow. Autumn descended upon Dorset in hues of copper and grief. The trees along Ravenswood Lane bent beneath the weight of rain, their leaves scattering like broken promises across the road. It had been 2 months since the ball, 2 months since Julia Harcourt had walked away from the Duke, leaving behind the wreckage of both their reputations. The gossip had dulled, replaced by newer scandals, but the wound remained unhealed. In the village, some pitied her, others whispered she had reached too high and been burned by her own audacity. Yet she endured it all in silence. Her father, weakened by illness and sorrow, passed quietly in his sleep one mist-shrouded morning. The funeral was simple, attended by the few who had loved him rather than feared judgment. Julia stood beside the grave as the last handful of earth fell, her shawl soaked through, her gloves cold and stiff. She felt the weight of finality pressed down like stone. With his death, the last tether binding her to Dorset's fragile safety had snapped. The cottage would soon belong to the parish. The world, once so small and predictable, stretched before her, vast, uncertain, and cruelly empty. In the weeks that followed, she packed her father's few possessions into a wooden trunk. Letters of condolence arrived from distant clergy, but none bore the crest she secretly searched for. She told herself she no longer cared. Yet each dawn, when the mist rose over the meadows, she would glance toward Ravenswood, where its towers pierced the gray like memories refusing to fade. On the final morning before her departure, she visited the churchyard once more. The air was sharp with the scent of rain, the ground soft beneath her shoes. She laid a single lily upon her father's grave and whispered a prayer for strength. But as she turned to leave, movement caught her eye, a dark figure standing at the edge of the churchyard, hat in hand, coat brushed with dew. It was him. The Duke of Ravenswood looked older than she remembered, the proud stillness in his bearing softened by something deeper, exhaustion, perhaps, or penance. His silver hair glimmered faintly beneath the overcast sky. For a moment she could not move, the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. "Your Grace," she breathed, her voice almost lost to the wind. He inclined his head. "Miss Harcourt." The words carried reverence, sorrow, and restraint all at once. She gathered her composure. "This is not a place for you." "On the contrary," he said quietly, "it is the only place I belong." She turned away, unwilling to face the ache that came with his voice. "You should not have come. I should have come long ago." He stepped closer, the gravel crunching softly beneath his boots. "I learned of your father's passing too late. I had been in London, handling what I believed were matters of duty. But duty," he said, bitterness shadowing his tone, "has stolen more from me than any sin ever could." Julia swallowed hard. "There is nothing left to say between us." "There is everything," he replied. "I have lived each day since that night with your words echoing through me. You called my kindness pity. You were wrong. It was love, unwanted perhaps but honest, and I would rather die despised for loving you than live praised for forgetting." She felt her composure tremble. "You mistake grief for devotion. What happened was ruinous for us both." He smiled faintly, a sad, knowing smile. "Ruin, Miss Harcourt, is the beginning of truth. Before you, I existed only as what the world demanded, a man of title, fortune, obedience. But the moment you struck me, I saw myself as something else. Human." The rain began to fall then, soft but steady. He removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. The scent of it, cedar, parchment, and faint tobacco, pierced through her defenses like a memory of warmth. "Do not do this," she whispered. "The world will laugh." "Let it," he said simply. "It has laughed at nobler things than love." She turned her face toward him, tears mingling with rain. "You cannot mean to offer what society will never forgive." He took her trembling hands in his gloves cold against her skin. "Forgiveness is overrated. I seek peace. And peace, I have learned, wears your face." Her heart gave a painful flutter. She tried to speak, but the words would not come. The sound of the rain deepened, a rhythm as relentless as her own pulse. "Julia," he said, her name breaking from him like a confession. "I will not ask you to marry me for pity or for propriety. I ask because I am tired of existing in rooms where you are not. Because I would trade every acre of Ravenswood for a single morning of your laughter." She shook her head, struggling to contain the swell of emotion that threatened to undo her. "You cannot mean this. Think of your name, your lineage." "My name," he said, stepping closer, "has brought me isolation. My lineage, only ghosts. You once asked why I forgave you for striking me. I did not forgive you. I thank you. For the first time, someone dared to meet me not as a duke but as a man. And I have spent every day since wishing you would strike me again, if only to feel you near." Her breath escaped her in a shuddered laugh, half disbelief, half sorrow. "You are impossible. I am undone," he said. "And I no longer wish to be otherwise." Lightning flared in the distance, illuminating his face, lined, earnest, vulnerable. She looked at him through the curtain of rain and saw not power but tenderness, not command but devotion. All her resistance crumbled beneath it. "Then you must take me as I am," she whispered. "Without name, without fortune, without anything but what little heart I have left." He released a trembling breath. "Gladly." For a moment they stood motionless, as if the world itself dared not intrude. Then, with solemn grace, he lowered to one knee before her, not as a nobleman before a conquest, but as a penitent before his salvation. "Julia Harcourt," he said softly, "will you end my exile and make Ravenswood your home?" Her tears broke freely now. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, if you promise never to let silence come between us again." He rose, and in that simple act the years between their worlds seemed to dissolve. He took her hand, pressing it to his heart, and she felt its beat, steady, mortal, human. The rain around them softened, as though even the heavens had grown gentle. When they returned to Ravenswood together later that day, the servants watched in astonishment. The Duke gave no orders, no explanations. He simply led her to the great hall, where the fire burned low. There, before the portrait of his late wife, he paused and spoke quietly, almost to the air. "Forgive me," he murmured, "for finding life again." That evening, the bells of the parish rang across the valley, not for death but for something reborn. The villagers gathered outside the gates, whispering of miracles and madness in equal measure. Inside the hall, Julia stood beside him, her hand in his, the firelight painting her face in gold. She turned to him, voice trembling with quiet awe. "Do you think the world will ever understand?" He smiled faintly. "It need only understand this. A man may rule estates, but a woman's courage can rule his soul." Outside, the storm broke at last, and the air filled with the clean, unburdened scent of rain-soaked earth. The Duke drew her close, his lips brushing her forehead with reverence rather than hunger. And in that still moment, beneath the echo of thunder and the fading toll of bells, the story that had begun with a single humiliating slap found its redemption in silence, the kind that belongs not to shame but to love fulfilled.